I want to thank you guys for coming today. We are going to be discussing the fifth blog post, which includes Einstein, Husserl, and Hume. Today I have with me Mr. Smith, Mr. Vidal, Ms. Caramello, Mr. McKernan, and Ms. Caldwell. Uh, Mr. McKernan has brought to the attention that he has a few points he'd like to start us off with.
I'll kick us off. I chose Miss Whirling's post, and one of the main points of hers was how we gain knowledge through experience, and more so regarding it to cause and effect. And one of the examples she brought up was an experience of her own switching majors and how she had to go through all the extra effort and all this extra paperwork. And she brought up the fact that someone who doesn't do this would not understand why someone would go through all this work, put through all this experience. So someone who doesn't have that exact same experience wouldn't understand the effects of what she has to go through. And she brought up an interesting question at the end of her blog post, which was, if similar cases can result in vastly different effects, can we really ever understand the logic of someone else's decision making without experiencing the exact same thing they have? Kind of opens it up to your interpretation. Personally, I believe that after reading Hume's examples, first of all, that it's more so you have to understand what the person's going through, and a lot of the times you can't really just put yourself in their shoes, so you can't understand what they're going through.
So experience is all relative.
Yes.
Interesting. Now,
I think I would agree with Mr. McKernan to a degree, that you can never really know what someone else is going through. But also at the same time, there's an element of like you can kind of have empathy for someone in a situation or something, or have understanding and kind of know where they're coming from in their decisions. So.
Well, empathy is actually you going through a similar aspect and being able to actually connect. But I think what you do mean is sympathy, which is where you are on the outside and you're not exactly sure what it would be like, but you try and give your best to understand, which is a good point. But did you say that she brought up cause and effect as well?
Yes. One thing I thought was interesting, that she brought up the fact that one cause could have multiple effects on someone. For example, her changing her major, you could say that someone who doesn't know what they want to do with their life, like they want to change their major, they could have two different effects of that decision. Being so, you take off a year of school, or you just completely change your major. You could have two vastly different effects there, all coming from the same cause.
Now, I think we're talking about cause and effects, and just the fact that the way these things work, which are very physical and observation, it kind of leads into something that Einstein was going about over theoretical physics in terms of empirical fact, which was observation, testing, and experience, things of this nature. And I was reading Mr. Mento's blog post, which was discussing this, the idea of empirical thinking versus rational thinking. And he proposed an interesting question of where do mathematical and where does the mathematical structures basically come, in dealing with geometry and just math as a whole, I guess. And he also elaborated to the fact that there's this idea of pure knowledge, or perfect knowledge, I guess, where a more solid way of thinking. And Einstein says it does not come from the empirical side, but we're not exactly sure where. And it was interesting. I think Mr. Mento contradicted himself, because he said that we could find this perfect way of thought of mathematics and the empirical and rational world through a more simpler way of thought, but that maybe it's going to take a lot of trial and error. But that seems like a very empirical way of doing it, to come to rational conclusions in a way. So I'm starting to think Einstein piggybacks on um, dualism in a way of, well, because he has brought up empirical versus rational, and that one can't exist without the other.
Yeah, I believe that because they might be two different worlds, but they need to work hand in hand because you're not going to find anything rational without doing with some experience in the theoretical world or physical world.
Um, One of the things that Einstein brought up was Eastwood's geometry. I believe, I'm not exactly sure how to say his name, but I mean, when it comes to geometry, they took that as a rational idea, and it's just drawing, or not drawing shapes, but recognizing shapes and angles, and very mathematical and pure. Whereas there's not really, I guess, a trial and error period. But I don't know. Usually when I think of this, I think of like pool. Like when you're playing pool, I always think of it in like geometry. You hit the ball one way, it's going to bounce that way. And that seems to be a rational thought, but I could only learn how to like gauge this without actually setting down a ruler through trial and error and observation experience. So I'd say in this case, Einstein's kind of pushing for the fact that dualism is not necessarily.
I thought it was interesting how you also brought up the whole trial and error because it goes hand in hand with experience. You're gonna have to want to do something over and over again, and once that can like conclude to like this perfect knowledge. Like once you do something over and over again, like you said, like it has the same results multiple times, consistently. That's when like something becomes almost like this geometrical law, like you said. Like
it's like the probability of it becomes higher and higher. So when you have the highest probability, you most likely assume that that's always going to happen. Like from Mr. Lasco's post, she talked about Hume and said that she talked about the two billiard balls like hitting each other, and you're not always going to know what direction it's going to go into, but you like assume if it happens enough amount of times. And she also talked about like if bread will always provide you with nutrients, and her like main question was you would always assume something will happen from your past experiences. And I think for that it depends on like because the future is always going to change, and if you can assume for now, but until one of those flaws happens within the change of it, it will like go into your own personal experience. So like be a part of it, so you'll have that one flaw, and you'll just like think about it within the experience. And for Mr. Mentor and Miss Whirling, I just have like a question about the differences because Miss Whirling kind of talks about it was like a college experience, which is like you want to change your major, you go through that own personal experience. But Mr. Mentor talks about like mathematical stuff, so those would be like two different experiences because mathematical is like what we all like kind of base our stuff off. Like if you talk about gravity, we all have that experience that gravity's gonna keep us down here. But with Miss Whirling, we have like different experiences. If you want to change your major, it's a different. You go through a different process, but we both have the same experience of knowing that like gravity is an effect. So we all know that, but have different. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, but I think maybe we could also feel gravity in a different sense. Like
Yeah.
people are heavier, people are lighter. Some people may have like a stronger body than others. I'm not saying that like it's really going to be that noticeable, but if you think about people just being different in general, it could have a different effect. I'm just gonna.
Like unique or something.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's like kind of similar to Miss Fortune's blog post on David Hume. She kind of talks about how like one effect can have like multiple causes. So like how can you like pinpoint just like one cause that like caused the effect to happen? And then she goes on to talk about the bread example, like Miss Delasco. And she kind of says like, or Hume says that just by looking at the bread, like you can look at its like color and its texture, but you wouldn't know that it it like nourishes you unless you like have experience like eating the bread and like realizing that like you can like you get nourishment from it. And so I thought she kind of talked about. She asked the question, how are you supposed to advance in knowledge without some past experience under your belt? And I thought this was interesting. I personally don't think that it would be like efficient or like possible to do this. Like in science, like you have the scientists that like look at past experiments and like look at the results and say, okay, well this happened. Like if we use this result in another experiment, like what can happen from there? So I think like experience like helps you to know like what works and what doesn't work. And so my question to you guys is like, where do you think we would be without experience? And like how important do you think it is, like not in like just like science, but like society as like a whole?
It's very important. It like makes you who you are. If you don't have experience, you basically don't really know what there is. Like even school wise, you won't know certain topics, and like life wise, you won't have your own like I forget what it's called, but examples. I don't know.
I was gonna say I completely agree with Ms. Fortson. Without experience, we're nothing. Like, you have it goes right back to like knowledge is experience. Like, without any experience, you have almost no knowledge of like anything. You would have no like, technology advancements in technology, like in the developments of our country. Like we wouldn't know like what like how to like base anything off of if we didn't fail or like have experience from something else.
I think even more basic than that, it seems like all these readings are kind of getting to the point that experience is something that like we create knowledge about and draw knowledge from, but that knowledge only means something if we can relate the first experience through the knowledge to another experience. So without some base experience, even if there was a way of like having some sort of knowledge, it still would be meaningless because if we couldn't use it to relate to more experience in life, then it wouldn't have any purpose. It wouldn't cause anything. It wouldn't matter.
I agree with that. Now, with all this being said, we've gone over dualism a lot. I believe Hume and them were talking about this essentially. How do we feel about dualism, like after like coming to some of these conclusions? Like, the fact that one can't really work without the other. You need experience in your life, and you need to be able to reflect upon it. And we've also said like the mind is not necessarily in the brain; it's more in like the void. It's something that we have, but you can't really, have like touch. It's not tangible. And we've also gone over the fact that drugs will have an effect on your mind, but also on your body. But that's an experience that we write down. We're chalking it up to something that we've dealt with in the past, or we've seen, or in some sense enveloped in it. I'm just wondering, does anyone agree with dualism? Yeah, partially so.
I agree with it because like you need the experience to learn like for like your mind to understand what different things do. Like you know that when you hurt there's a physical way pill that creates in the void a way to stop the pain. And we know that the pill does a certain thing to your body, but we don't know exactly how the mind is affected by that pill.
Could it be like you're taking a pill, but you know it's gonna make you better, so that void makes you think you're gonna feel better. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, so
okay.
like your mind kind of like goes along and like helps like your body.
Like a positive outlook.
Placebo effect.
Yeah, like having
Yeah.
like a positive outlook, like you said, like can help like with the physical sense.
I think it's weird the relationship between kind of in the same breath like mind and body, and then also like the physical like experience things and then like reasoning, because it seems to me that like the mind and the body, like if you don't have a body then your mind really seems kind of like useless, like it's just floating around, like doesn't do much because it like can't do much, it doesn't mean anything because it just like maybe you can think and stuff, but what is the effect of that thinking? There is none. And then if there's a body without a mind, it's useless too. And kind of how that relates to experience things and observations, and then like rational thinking. And I think it's weird how they both really feed off of each other, and you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Even though they're like separate like entities, like they definitely do rely on each other, and like one without the other would be useless.
That's why it's like kind of confusing too, because yeah, they're their own separate things that they have their own functions and own job and stuff, but in order for it to actually come into effect, it's one.
Yeah.
That's really confusing.
So yeah, like that, Mr. Gadway talks about in his blog post with talking about Albert Einstein, where Einstein talks about how math and experience goes together, because without math, like if you have to solve this one math problem without the experience of like knowing how to take those steps, you don't exactly know what to do. Your mind will have no idea what to do, and it'll just be there. So unless you take someone else's mind who's already done the experience of those math problems, will know how to do it with ease. So you need the experience to do like certain things in the physical world.
Can we rely on other people's experiences, though, to do things in the physical world? Because with you just saying that, the first thing that popped in my head was guns for some reason. Because I know there's a lot of math that goes into guns and just shooting it, especially like the more elite class shooters like snipers or anything like that. And there are calculations that go into performing this task, considering variables like wind factor, distance, things like that, bullet drop. And someone wouldn't have known about this without the experience of dealing with it. But we've come to a point where there's a mathematical equation for where you just need to plug it in at X amount of distance and you're going to hit your target. So it's kind of interesting that we can rely on other people's experiences to better ourselves, which I think was it Misfortune or someone said, maybe it was Whirling, that without experience we couldn't advance.
Yeah, that was Misfortune.
Right. So yeah, I think that really actually piggybacks off that, with, as Mr. Gadway was saying, that mathematical things really go hand in hand with experience. I would totally agree.
I believe it also begs the question because it's like, I would say it's like there's almost like a line drawn, because with mathematics you have these steps, you can see it all right there, and like there's only one answer, so like you know if you're right or wrong. But like when you bring up the question, can we trust other people's experiences? They may have like had this experience and like it's like not set in stone, because you could have a different experience from like some like one cause can cause multiple effects. Like it was one of Miss Whirling's post that like I feel like there's that line drawn between mathematics, because mathematics there's like only one way, there's only one answer. Like with like experience you can have multiple multiple answers, you could say. Like there are multiple effects like that could come out of like a cause.
So like two carpenters asked to build the same thing, and
Exactly.
depending on how each one goes about it. Yeah,
there's not going to be that answer set in stone.
Absolutely right.
Like,
And
Yeah, they're not going to build exactly the same.
an easier way to look at it is that there's multiple teachers for, we can go philosophy or English.
Yeah.
They all teach a class a different way. Like for one of my
That's
friends'
so.
class in philosophy, they take tests and quizzes and everything, and in ours we read about blog posts and have discussions. So is there a difference between, are they learning more than us, or are we learning more than them, or is it the
Yeah.
same?
This is going to bring about an experience that is very different for all of us, and we all might walk away with, different knowledge due to the fact that we were taught just differently, and we went over the same material, which is interesting.
Yeah. Even though we go over the same material, there might be like certain groups that go in more depth with it than others.
Right.
Might have a little more knowledge. Which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Like I would say, in our class, we go into a lot of depth versus people who are taking quizzes on
Yeah.
just the main ideas.
and
Where, I was just gonna say, like, we stick a lot to the text, but we're more concise on our text. We're very, very detailed.
And I think that relates to experience and how do you trust someone else's experience? Do you rely on your own? Where's the line that you can say like, all right, well this I can trust, but like I'm not just gonna go on this because this is what everything I'm told. And like my roommate has a different philosophy teacher, and they don't really like get into the discussions of things, and they don't really like get this in depth in things. And so he had a midterm, and he's like asking me all these things. He didn't know what he didn't know, and he was like, well, we read it, and then they talked like the teacher talked about it, whatever. I don't know what happened, but it wasn't like his experience. He was just going on like, this is what my teacher says that this means. You know what I mean? And he didn't know almost anything about it. Like it didn't have any meaning to him. And like for us, like I felt like anybody in our class could have gotten there and like without ever having that teacher would have known like anything on that test because of the way that like the experience of talking about it and discussing it in class, it makes the experience our own, something we can trust.
So like Descartes' pure knowledge, where through radical doubt you need to basically throw everything out the window that you know and experience it for yourself to then know exactly how that works for yourself.
It's like giving yourself your own explanation of it.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to like go off of other people's experiences because they don't have different feelings about stuff and like might not view it the same way that you view it.
You kind of like can't trust it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I got Mr. Morris's blog post to talk about. I'm going to talk about Mr. Morris's blog post. He said that he was struck by Hume's. He had two arguments that Mr. Morris talked about. The first was that humans can never really find the effect of a supposed cause by the most accurate of scrutiny and examination. And to me, it kind of sounded like, and he kind of touched on too, is that it wasn't that like we could understand it, like it wasn't that we could never understand it through through logically thinking about it. We had to, and he even said like we had to experience it, wait to see how things unfold, and I guess that's to apply reason to something is not as good as to experience it. Like you can never be as certain when something happens. And the second point that he brought up was in our reasonings, apart from experience, we will never be able. In our reasonings, apart from experience, will never be able to show us the true cause of something. And he talks about jumping out of a window, which please don't do that. But he says he's never jumped out of his dorm room window, but he's pretty certain of what would happen if he did. And it seemed to me that like that was kind of like it raised the question in me like what is the difference between knowing the absolute effect that will come from something and knowing what the most likely or like you can know something's gonna happen through knowledge or whatever, like as far as you can know it, but what if experience changes and like you can never really be sure about something until it's experienced.
see, I would say he could know jumping out of his window in two different ways. He could say he understands the experience of jumping out of his window through, say, empirical knowledge, because you would observe that things that fall out of the window, fall pretty fast, and they hit the ground with a lot of force. You hear a thud, something like that, or maybe he's seen it on TV or whatever, and usually someone gets hurt. A rational type of thinking would be able to say like, well, here's gravity and its force and whatnot, so like 9.8 times my mass and then the acceleration of that gravity and the amount of force that X amount of weight will hit the ground with, and how much force can a human body take. Like you could do basically a mathematical equation that brings about a rational conclusion to say jumping out my window might not be a good idea. So.
One point I thought was interesting was how he, I think it was his first point where he made where like we can we won't fully understand something till we actually experience it. So like I thought I first thing that popped in my head was like mathematics, like math, like you can have like a complex math equation and then like you have like you they don't no work is shown, you just have an answer, but like you can know that's the answer, but, like how do you actually know that's the answer? Like you like the math shown, like all the work shown, like that like experience, I guess you could say. That's the way I looked at it. Like with the jumping out of his window example, like you said, it's rational thinking. Like you basically know what's going to happen. Like you're going to get very injured, but like I guess you could say there's something in the back of your head saying like, what if like this could be different? Like
Yeah.
Have the experience too because, like going off that or jumping out your window, yeah, it's like a bad idea. You shouldn't do it. But there like are some cases where people like have survived and like not even have gotten hurt.
Yeah.
Like there was this one case where someone got in a car accident, got thrown out the windshield over the overpass, and lived because he landed on a snowbank and like just broke his ankles or something. But he was like fine on his feet. Like that takes time to like experience. Like you could say he's lucky, something like that, but it's crazy how it could work.
It did seem to you guys, it kind of felt to me like the 2 points were, or the points Mr. Morse made about it were conflicting. Because the first point, that we have to like experience things to really truly understand it or whatever, and not be able to tell something through examination. And the second point, which he disagreed with, he was trying to say, it seemed to me that like you can know the outcome of something without, I can't read that. All right, yeah. So you can know the outcome of something without experiencing it for sure. Like if you jump in a window, you know it's gonna happen. Did that seem like it was kind of conflicting to you guys?
Well, you need based off what we've been talking about so far. Like you need to have experience to be able to know like what's going to happen. I mean, I think it can vary to a degree, especially in the circumstance. So we as human beings we're very social. We communicate knowing like other people's experiences, and sometimes we'll get advice that people will be like, don't jump out your window, that's not a good idea. But some people are really stubborn, like, well, I need to experience it for myself. They get hurt and they go, hey, that wasn't a good idea. So then they try and pass it on. So I don't know if it's as much conflicting as it is adding on to what we've already said in a way. Because I don't think any of us would just say that you have to have experience to know anything. I think we're all rational enough people to be able to decide, like, there are things worth experiencing, worth taking someone's word for it, and also worth working out a rational equation to figure out if that is a good option. As we usually do, we weigh the options of, like, if I do this, what's going to be the effect? But if I do this, what's going to be the effect? That type of rational processing.
There's a line between that and common sense. Like, you wouldn't be like, I'm just going to go jump out a window. No, doesn't work that way.
So I'd say almost in conclusion, almost the main topic being experience leads to knowledge, and that like you also bring up the idea of like cause and effect and like some of the other points we talked about, but like in the end I think we've concluded that personal experience is the best way for ourselves to gain knowledge. What would you say?
I would say I would agree with that if we add in
Added,
the like to an extent.
to an extent.
Yeah.
You have
I
other
guess
factors,
sometimes-
like you said, rational thinking.
Advice, weighing the odds. I would then also add that when it comes to these like separate worlds or ways of thinking, that I would say the fact that they rely on each other kind of makes it just one big world that we know. So I would chalk it up to I disagree with dualism, and I also think that personal experience is the best way to learn to an extent.
To an extent.
Yes. Well, thank you for coming today. I'm sure we'll do this again soon.
Yeah.